Thought the games today weren't going to be super exciting, but they actually ended up being a lot closer than I expected. Obviously, there are a bunch of fantasy football players that were impacted. Your boy started Laporta. Sadly, I had to go up against Jacobs. So let's talk about it all, ladies and gentlemen. First off, starting in Detroit, in my mind, does anything really change? Not particularly at quarterback. I mean, Jared Goff still remains a quarterback that is pretty much going to be a matchup to matchup play. Obviously, every single week, pretty much over the past 2 months, we have seen sportsbooks put the Detroit Lions the highest scoring offense in the NFL, and that's what we had today. I mean, they're very good today, obviously. That's what we've had most weeks. And going over and looking at what we have with the limitations of Goff, however, is it's going to be a team that continuously runs the ball, where Jared Goff doesn't have a ton of rushing himself. You have 33 rush attempts total for this offense in comparison to only 34 pass attempts. So it's a rush first offense. And at the same time, Jared Goff himself doesn't have a ton of rushing upside. Now with David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, nothing really changes. I understand a lot of people were upset for us to rank Jahmyr Gibbs as a mid to low end RB1 rather than a high end RB1. And big reason for this is, David Montgomery's going to have a very large role. We've seen it all season. With Montgomery, you get the 24 opportunities this week. Jahmyr Gibbs could have gotten there if it wasn't for him fumbling pretty much at the goal line, only about 4 yards out. But does anything change? Nope. I mean, I would say Gibbs is a mid to low end RB1. David Montgomery, high end RB2, low end RB1 for pretty much the rest of the season. It doesn't really have any impact here whatsoever. Going over to Amon-Ra St. Brown, the reason he's not a tier 1 or wide receiver for us is given the limited passing volume in this offense with this being a rush first team. St. Brown, you only have 7 targets, but that's pretty much what we've seen all season for Amon-Ra St. Brown. Not anything really different there. Obviously, most games this season, he's giving you the touchdown, so the lack of volume hasn't really been too big of an impact, and St. Brown still stays a mid-wide receiver 1 rest of season here because, again, you are going to have a ton of points scored in this Lions offense. And going through and actually looking at who scored the points, thank freaking God. I had to start this dude this week. Obviously, you've heard me cry about this all season. I drafted a ton of Sam Laporta this year. Thought it was a great idea. The sportsbooks were telling us it was going to be an elite offense. Obviously, Sam Laporta was arguably the best rookie tight end of all time last season. So I was like, oh, okay, round 4 draft pick, sign me up. And the offense is just as good as what we were hoping, but Sam Laporta still not getting a ton of volume. So it is pretty damn frustrating on that front, projecting him going into the future. Definitely helped me with the best ball teams this week. Definitely helped me in the flock leagues, keeping me in it despite me going up against Jacobs. But underlying the 2 receiving touchdowns, the dude had 6 receiving yards. So can I come through and say, oh, no, Sam Laporta, he's back. He's what we wanted him to be. He's a locked and loaded tight end 1. No, I mean, this is somebody that you could potentially play as a spot start option. Honestly, if you would have told me that Dalton Kincaid would have been good this week, I probably would have started Kincaid instead. But going over to Jameson gets another game with 7 targets here, which ties Amon-Ra St. Brown. And now this kind of back-to-back contest for Jameson Williams, a player that historically I thought has had a cap ceiling. The back-to-back games where he's had a decent amount of target volume, the touchdown hasn't been there. But honestly, knowing the big play upside, knowing the touchdown upside of this offense, I'd imagine Jameson has better games going into the future. I still think that he is worth flex consideration, of course. But ultimately, not much changes in Detroit. Going over and looking at what we have in Chicago. Here, maybe this is going to be a little bit different. If you're looking at Caleb Williams, the box score maybe will lie. Like literally the first down the Chicago Bears got today was the drive before halftime. The Bears could not do anything. The vast majority of the points they put on the board, it was in the 4th quarter when this game was out of hand. Now, of course, I mean, at the very end, it doesn't matter. The Bears couldn't do anything until the very end of this game. The Caleb Williams at the very end of this game looked decent. Yes, he had 3 receiving touchdowns. Yes, he had 39 rushing yards. Does Caleb change from anything other than a weekly quarterback streamer depending on the matchup that he's in? Probably not, right? Going over to what we have with the running backs, Roschon Johnson gets banged up. I started DeAndre Swift this week, so once Roschon goes down, I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess Swift will have absolutely everything, including the receiving usage. And doesn't really matter here at all. I mean, with Swift, you get 3.5 yards a carry. I mean, this is what we saw at the beginning of the season. And the receiving usage, cool, we get 3 targets. Again, we talked about DeAndre Swift being the sell-high candidate a few weeks back when the man was absolutely crushing. Looking forward to this tough stretch of games he was going to have. He has 2 games against Detroit, 2 games against Minnesota coming up soon. Or just got out of one, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean. So little tough stretch of games here for this Chicago Bears offense. Swift will probably be a must-start running back next week if Roschon misses, of course. But I don't know. I'm not excited to play Swift in tough matchups with this offense not looking great until the very end of the game. At the very end of the game, DJ Moore looked phenomenal. Looking at the receivers here, Rome Odunze only had 6 targets. Rome Odunze did have a pretty nasty drop. I mean, looking at DJ Moore, 16 targets. DJ Moore had all the production last week with only 7 targets, and you actually had Keenan Allen doubling the target share for DJ Moore last week. And now DJ Moore doubles the targets of any other receiver in this offense. It's a very concentrated offense as well. Really, the only 5 players you'd ever consider in fantasy are the 5 guys that touch the ball, especially with Roschon being banged up. But DJ Moore, Keenan Allen both look great. And I think at this point, we can safely say that you would rather have both wide receivers over Rome Odunze rest of season. And I don't know. I mean, if you think that there will be passing volume here in Chicago, obviously there's reason to be excited about Keenan, who's just been averaging over 10 targets a game like over the past 3 weeks. And DJ Moore, who over the past month has actually had a couple really big spike weeks here. But a lot of it is at least for me, I feel like you're relying on garbage time, Caleb. Now let's go over to the Giants where we actually got to see Drew Lock. Drew Lock, yes, gets there in fantasy based off what he does as a rusher. Drew Lock was not an interesting streamer candidate before the games today. There's no reason to think of him anything other than just a gross quarterback you occasionally will have to watch if you are turning on the slate of games. At least red zone. They won't be in the red zone very often. Going over to running back, you have 7 carries for Singletary. Pseudo splits the backfield with Tyrone Tracy. Frankly, again, I want to reiterate, I'm not the biggest Tracy guy. It was a very clear sell-high candidate after the Pittsburgh game, but to be fair to Tracy, the man continues to be more efficient than Devin Singletary, and the receiving usage has actually improved a bit. Where this week you get 33 receiving yards, last week the receiving usage was there as well. And going over to Malik Neighbors, I continue to try to root on his downfall for my underdog teams. But he keeps getting there in terms of just a full PPR format. The man has 13 targets out of a potential 32. So ultimately, if you're getting a third of the targets in this offense, you're going to be somebody that you have to start a full PPR format, even if the offense is absolute garbage. Now, going over the Dallas Cowboys side of things, a couple things here. One, do not think about Cooper Rush ever in fantasy football. The only thing that you think about Cooper Rush is the context of how he affects this offense. Never stream this dude. Going over to running back, you have 22 touches or 22 carries for Rico Dowdle, 1 carry for Ezekiel Elliott, 1 carry for Turpin, and 3 carries for Rico Dowdle turns into the full 3-down bell cow. Going through and looking at Dowdle as a receiver, you also get 3 targets, so 25 total opportunities. Playing every snap. This was a game environment where you actually could have considered Rico Dowdle a strong play, looking at the fact that the Dallas Cowboys were actually favored in this game. We've been talking about it where the sportsbooks had Dallas as a bottom 3 offense last week and a bottom 3 offense the week prior with the projections with Cooper Rush under center. But this week, they had an implied team total of 20 points. Sportsbooks were a lot higher on the Dallas Cowboys offense this week, and they obviously were favored here over the Giants. So with Rico, I think any game where the Cowboys are actually favored in the future, he probably will end up being a must-start play. Going over to what we have with CeeDee Lamb, you have the 6 targets, but obviously the points do not follow. We got a bunch of people saying, oh, Lamb on the sideline, Lamb on the side. I don't know. Realistically speaking, I don't think Brandon Cooks is going to have an impact going into the future. Brandon Cooks gets the touchdown here. If anything, I think the addition of Brandon Cooks only makes it where you have absolutely no interest ever in playing Jalen Tolbert. I still think CeeDee Lamb is a must-start wide receiver every game that he is healthy. And I still think you should expect double-digit targets. We had that for 5 weeks straight here. Going over to the Miami game, obviously, there were a lot of conversations about Tua in the weather. Big narrative that you have since the Kansas City Chiefs game last season. And here, Tua statistically gives you a great game. In reality, this wasn't a real football game. Obviously, Tua puts up a lot of these garbage time statistics. And I honestly thought I was going to have to come out here and go, holy crap. One, it's freaking midnight here on the East Coast. The East Coast is killing me right now. But two, you get there with the garbage time at the very end. So that does save a lot of these options. Obviously, when you are getting the 357 passing yards for Tua, a lot of these receivers are going to look good. And going down to what we have with Jonnu has emerged. I mean, from a snaps perspective, a routes perspective, pretty much across the board, Jonnu Smith is giving you elite tight end production right now. I think realistically, we had Jonnu Smith ranked tight end 10 this week. Obviously, projections were lower on this Dolphins offense this week than what we had seen the 2 weeks prior. But outside of the big 5 tight ends, I'll throw Hawkinson into that group just because you have such a large sample of Hawkinson dominance. I think you can very strongly make an argument. Jonnu Smith is tight end 6 rest of season. Jonnu Smith is a must-start guy every single week. Going over to Tyreek, we get there with the receiving touchdown. I don't have to make a public apology. I'm looking at the running backs. Obviously, nothing changes here. Achan's going to get there with the receiving usage. You start Achan every single week as a running back 1 in a full PPR format. Particular non-PPR league, you would move him down a bit, but the man has 3 touchdowns over the past 2 games, so who cares? And then Jalen Waddle, I benched this week, sending a prayer that either Devonta Smith or DK Metcalf will play on Sunday. I'm assuming we get one of them. I feel good about benching Waddle. The man only has 9 points, but underlying this, you had 45 potential targets in this offense, and Waddle accounts for 4 of them. So realistically, obviously, get the Waddle blow up last week. It was his second game this season with double-digit fantasy points, but I don't see how you could ever be excited about starting Waddle going into the future. And then I don't even think you need to roster any of the Miami backs outside of Achan, because the thing is, if Achan goes down, I don't know if Mostert's the only running back touching the ball here. And Mostert will have absolutely no usage as a receiver. Now, going over to Green Bay, I had to play Josh Jacobs. Against Josh Jacobs, I apologize. And honestly, I think it could have been a lot worse. So Jordan Love, for me, has been a must-start quarterback. This is yet another game where you have the Packers really easily controlling it, and you don't have to see 40-plus Jordan Love pass attempts. Jordan Love doesn't run the ball at all. So from a fantasy perspective, very disappointing with Jordan Love. But obviously, this is one of the best offenses in the NFL. Josh Jacobs is going to be the only running back that really touches the ball here. You get 19 carries in comparison to a total of 24 potential, excluding Jaden Reed. Going down, looking at the receiving usage, Josh Jacobs drops 74 receiving yards and 4 receptions. So you have a 3-down running back with the touchdown upside in one of the best offenses in the NFL. Going over to the receivers, they were more interesting this week considering the fact that you take Romeo Doubs out of this offense, or removing Doubs. It's going to concentrate the targets here just a bit. Tucker Kraft comes through with a decent day. Obviously, if you started Kraft in a full PPR format, you're excited about the 14 points. Again, I don't necessarily view Tucker Kraft as much more than a low-end tight end 1. When you have no Romeo Doubs, you're a little bit more excited about him. I'm going over to the receivers. I keep saying, Jaden Reed's not going to keep on doing this with limited volume. Now, obviously, it was a lot easier to be excited about Jaden Reed this week with no Romeo Doubs. But the dude, off of 3 receptions, comes through and generates about 16 fantasy points. Jaden Reed, from the literal start of this season to now in week 13, is giving the most with the least. If he touches the ball, he is going to be viable. Obviously, it was a good matchup. You had no Romeo Doubs as well. But it's crazy. Another 6-target game. He's had one game with more than 6 targets all season. So Reed was obviously a locked and loaded wide receiver 2 for us this week. But I just don't necessarily think our mind changes too much when Romeo Doubs comes back in. I think that this is still very much going to be an up and down wide receiver, kind of reliant on touchdowns and big plays based off the fact that there are just so many different options in this offense where the target share can't be too concentrated. But I see a couple people in the chat. I see somebody saying that Achane had only like 17 rushing yards. Achane actually only had 14 rushing yards. But frankly, again, it just simply does not matter if you're playing in a full PPR format and you're getting this kind of receiving usage. Literally just off the receiving, this would be a running back too. So anything as a rusher, you're excited. Daniel says, how long has Jonnu been producing? A few weeks. Don't know exactly what you mean by that question, my guy. But I mean, Jonnu has looked this good for pretty much about the past month. And obviously it's been off the back of just a ridiculous amount of volume from Tua. But it is crazy that pretty much all the points in this offense are being funneled through Jonnu and Achane. I do want to reiterate, obviously, with Tyreek Hill, as we've said, though, that this is still a must-start wide receiver. Even if he's not the wide receiver 1 overall, wide receiver 2 overall, even if he's still disappointing for where you drafted the guy at, never consider benching him. Unless, obviously, you have no Tua. But I think we talked about every game here, so probably going to call it. Obviously, I'm super thankful for you stopping by. I am about to pass out. I stayed up just for this live stream. I'm very, very tired, but I will be back in the Central Time Zone soon. We will be back to having a little more energy for these. But much love, ladies and gentlemen. Hope that you did not have to go up against Achane, Tyreek, Jacobs, Reed, or I guess Laporta. But your boy had Laporta. Well, we'll flex on the side. Sadly, obviously, we had to go up against Jacobs. But anyway, really appreciate you and really hope we get to see you out in the live stream tomorrow night.